Welcome to the Cursed Hour, where every whisper in the dark, every creak in the floor, might be something watching threes. If you found this channel, you're already part of the curse. The night I saw too much, you're alone in a vast, empty parking lot. The night swallowing the world beyond a flickering streetlight. The glow of your cigarette, the only warmth. I've been working as an overnight security guard at Walmart for about 3 years now, at this big old supercenter just off the highway near my hometown. The store is silent, locked tight, but out here, in the shadows, something moves, something that will haunt you forever. It's definitely one of the better jobs I've worked. Even with all the nights involved, you're no hero, just a guy watching screens. But tonight, you'll see evil unfold and be powerless to stop it. The pay is decent, the benefits are okay, and most nights it's just me and another guard chilling in the asset protection office, keeping an eye on the cameras and talking trash to keep each other awake. The store is your fortress, but the lot is a wild frontier. The store is closed from midnight to 6 o'clock, so it tends to be nice and quiet on the inside. But outside that parking lot's a whole different story. Inside, it's all fluorescent lights and orderly aisles. But beyond the walls, the darkness hides secrets. After a while, you get used to seeing things that make most folks' skin crawl. Drifters, dealers, joyriders, you've seen them all, but nothing like this. But this one night about 6 months back, I saw what has to be the scariest thing I've ever seen on the job. It starts routine, but ends in horror. A moment that burns into your soul. You're not a cop, not a rookie, just a watcher. I'm pretty seasoned by now. 3 years on the graveyard shift have dulled your nerves, but not your instincts. And by that, I mean I'm not some rookie jumping at shadows, but I'm also not some kind of wannabe cop either. Your job is simple. Protect the store, not chase trouble. My job is to watch the store. Make sure nobody's breaking in or setting the place on fire. Anything beyond the property line is for the police. But tonight, that line blurs. Then anything outside the store walls is for the cops to handle, unless it's a direct threat to the property. Cameras are your eyes, but they're blind in the dark. We've got cameras all over the place, inside and outside. And they're good enough to catch a shoplifter snagging a TV or some kid spray painting the loading dock. They catch the obvious: thieves, vandals. But out in the lot's far reaches, they're useless. But out in the far reaches of the parking lot, forget it. It's all grainy blobs and shadows past a certain point. The night begins like any other, dull and uneventful. Now, anyway, this night started out as normal. Quiet. Pretty boring, really. You're lulled, expecting nothing but the usual monotony. You step out, craving a break from the screens. And then at around 2 I told my shift partner that I was headed out for a smoke break. The nicotine calls. A vice you can't shake. I've been trying to quit for years. But those overnight shifts drive people to worse habits than smoking. And purely out of boredom. 2. Your partner's glued to his phone, oblivious. As you slip out, my partner was back at the security desk, scrolling through his phone or watching reruns of Cops on YouTube. And I told him that I was stepping out for a smoke and then grabbed my jacket and headed for the emergency exit by the auto care center. You propped the door, a small rebellion. I propped the door open with a brick, which is against policy. I know, but nobody's checking at that hour. The lot stretches before you, vast and mostly empty. And then I just stood outside, taking some drags and staring out into the night. A few cars dot the expanse, employee vehicles, maybe an RV. The parking lot is massive, obviously, just like most Walmart parking lots are, I guess. It's quiet, but never truly safe. And at 2 a.m., it's mostly empty except for a few employee cars and an RV or two. The lot is a stage for the lost and the lawless. Sometimes we get drifters or tweakers, maybe kids racing their souped-up Civics. But most of the time, I don't pay them much mind. You've learned to let things slide, to live and let live. I'm a real live and let live kind of guy. You know? You're not here to play cop or hero. I'm not out here to try and be a hero or boss anyone around. You just want your smoke, your shift, your peace. I just want my smoke, and then I want to go back and do my job. Then you see them. 2 cars. Too close. Too secretive. Now anyway, I'm halfway through my smoke break, leaning against the wall, when I notice these 2 cars out in the far corner of the lot, less than 100 yards out. An SUV and a sedan. Trunks aligned. 3 men lurking. They're backed up to each other. Trunk to trunk. Very close-like. You know. The SUV's trunk gapes open, a silent invitation. One's a dark SUV, the other's a beat-up sedan. Maybe a Camry or something. They're not loud, but their furtive glances scream trouble. The SUV's got its trunk open, and there's 3 guys standing around it. You've seen deals before, but this feels different. They're not being loud or anything, but the way they're positioned, huddled, glancing around every few seconds. It's obvious they're up to no good. Drugs, guns, you've witnessed quick exchanges, but this lingers. I've seen deals go down before. Not a lot, but I've seen them. They're usually fast, but these guys are deliberate. Usually, it's quick. You stay put. Watching. Curious, but cautious. Money changes hands, trunks close, and then they peel out. You don't call unless it's blatant. But you're hooked. I don't call the cops unless it's blatant. Like if they're waving a pistol around or something. Your rule is clear. If it's off property, it's not your fight. My rule is if it's not on Walmart property, and it's not a clear threat, I let it slide. You observe. A voyeur to their shadowed dance. So, I'm watching these guys, keeping my distance. Just kind of being snoopy, I guess. 2 men hover by the SUV, 1 by the sedan, hesitant, and 2 of them are standing by the open trunk, gesturing like they're showing something off, while the 3rd guy is standing a little closer to the sedan, kind of hanging back like he's making his mind up. They're cloaked in hoodies, faces lost to the dark. They're all dressed up in hoodies and jeans. Nothing too flashy, but I can't make out faces or license plates from where I'm at. And our camera sure as hell wouldn't be able to either. You guess it's a deal. Maybe drugs. Maybe worse. I figured it's drugs. Maybe grass. Maybe something harder. It could just as easily be guns. But I don't see any obvious hardware. You're not scared. Just intrigued. Watching like it's a gritty documentary. I'm not spooked. Just curious. You know, like watching a nature documentary about shady parking lot creatures. Then it happens. A betrayal in seconds. But that's when things take a turn. The 3rd man steps forward, inspecting the trunk. The guy who was hanging back steps forward, and then leans in to look at whatever's in the SUV's trunk. You expect the deal to close, but violence erupts. He's got his hands on his hips, very casual, like he's inspecting something up close. A bag goes over his head, and a knife flashes. And I'm thinking, all right, the deal's wrapping up. They're going to be gone soon. But then out of nowhere, one of the other guys pulls something from behind his back. A bag or something. Maybe a pillowcase. I couldn't tell. He's stabbed. Relentlessly. A brutal ambush. And then he throws it over the 3rd guy's head. Before I can even process what's happening, the other SUV guy lunges forward and starts stabbing him. It's a slaughter, over in moments. And I mean like turning him into a sieve, stabbing him over and over, super quick. The victim collapses, voiceless, into the trunk. The guy with the bag over his head doesn't even have time to scream. You're frozen, your cigarette a forgotten ember. He just stumbles, struggles a little, and then he's down, out of sight, as his buddies throw him in the trunk. And I'm just frozen for a split second. Your mind reels. Murder, kidnapping, betrayal. Cigarette dangling between my fingers. Thinking. Oh, God, help me. That was for real, wasn't it? You run, heart hammering, as tires scream, and my heart's pounding like a jackhammer, and every instinct I've got is telling me to get the hell inside. The emergency exit is your lifeline. So, I dropped my smoke without stopping to stomp on it, and then bolted for the emergency exit. You slam it shut, the SUV's taillights fading. I'd left it propped open like always, and I'm not a small guy, but I was running like I'd just seen a ghost. Your hands shake, locking the bolt, and as I'm pulling the door shut behind me, I hear tires screeching, and then I catch a glimpse of the SUV speeding off, red tail lights glowing as it disappeared into the dark. You're safe, but the horror clings. I locked the door, my hands shaking so bad that I could barely get the bolt to slide. You sprint to the office, your partner oblivious, and I remember cursing under my breath, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. You demand he call the police, your voice raw, and I sprint back to my security office where my partner was still parked at the desk, scrolling through his phone like it was just another Tuesday. He's stunned, but dials 911, and I yelled at him to call the cops. You replay it, the violence etched in your mind. And he looked up at me like confused, wondering what's going on. I told him what I saw, how I was pretty certain I just witnessed a guy getting murdered, and his eyes went wide. The cops arrive, and you spill what little you know. And then he dialed 911 right away. It was too fast, too far, too dark. And I remember pacing back and forth as he handed me his phone, trying to get my thoughts straight as I replayed everything in my head. The stabbing, the bag, the trunk, 10 seconds of terror. And it all happened so fast. Maybe 10 seconds from the bag going over the guy's head to the SUV peeling out. The police press for details you don't have. I can still picture the way the guy's arm moved. That quick, jerky, stabby motion like something right out of a horror movie. You saw a crime, but not enough to solve it. The cops showed up about 15 minutes later. I told them everything I saw, which, honestly, wasn't all that much. No faces, no plates, just violence. And there were 3 guys, 2 cars, one got stabbed a bunch. And then the SUV took off. I didn't see any faces, didn't catch any plate numbers, and I didn't hear any names either. They question you, but you're empty-handed. They start asking me a million questions. What kind of bag was it? How many times did the guy get stabbed? Did I hear anything? Did I see any blood? But I had nothing for them. You feel useless, a witness to nothing. It was too far, too dark, and it all happened too quick. You're not trained for this, not equipped. I felt kind of useless, like I should have seen more or done more. What could you do? Unarmed, alone. But then, what was I supposed to do, run out there with my flashlight and my walkie-talkie? The footage is a blur. Useless is your memory. And after we talked, the cops seemed more interested in the security footage. So me and my partner pulled up the feeds from the exterior cameras. The cameras fail you, capturing only shadows. We've got a couple pointed at the parking lot. But like I said, they're not great. The cars are ghosts. The crime invisible. The cars were too far out, right at the edge of the lot where the lights barely reached them. The cops take what little you offer, disappointed. All the footage showed were two blurry shapes and some movement, but you couldn't make out details. They checked the sedan, but find nothing. No faces or plates. Really nothing useful at all. You're left in silence, the weight settling. The cops were frustrated, but obviously not with us. They took a copy of the footage anyway and said they checked the sedan that was still out there. You and your partner sit. Stunned, the night stretching on. After they left, my partner and I just sit there quiet for a while. He's fine, but you're not. He was all right, but I was pretty shaken up. You replay it. The speed, the brutality. I kept thinking about how fast it happened. One moment, a man lived. The next, he was gone. 1 second, the guy was alive, probably thinking that he was making a quick deal. Then the next, he's got a bag over his head and a knife in his gut, and it was all over and done in seconds. You'll never know the truth, and it gnaws at you. It was just crazy to me. How does that even happen? Who were those guys? Was it a setup? A betrayal? Some kind of gang thing? Sometimes it frustrates me that I'll never know. The news stays silent. The cops never call. And the cops never really followed up. At least not with me. You check for answers, but find none. And I check the news for days, but there's really nothing. No reports or arrests. The lot is the same. But you're changed. And I still work the overnight shift, but I don't smoke outside anymore. You quit the habit, but not the memory. I use those Zyn things now, those little pouches, and I stay in the break room if I need a fix. The emergency exit is a trigger, a reminder of your helplessness. But every time I walk by that emergency exit, I'm reminded of what happened that night and how I watched it all go down. Fights, thefts, they fade. But this endures. I've seen a lot in this job. Fights, thefts, you name it, and they're forgotten a week after. You saw a man die, or close to it, and it's etched in you. But what happened that night is something I know I'll never forget. Cece's vigilance haunts you. Watch. Always watch, because evil strikes when you least expect. The scar of vengeance. In a bustling store where strangers pass like ghosts, one glance can unearth a buried past. The sprawling retail hub was Ethan's new beginning, a place where he traded chaos for order. His face, marked by a jagged scar, drew stares, but he wore it like armor. For Ethan, a man clawing his way from a troubled youth, the job was salvation, but some sins follow you, waiting to strike. He'd seen plenty in his time, fights, thefts, petty dramas, but nothing stuck like that night by the emergency exit. Ethan's childhood was a storm of rebellion. Raised by a struggling mother, he ran wild, breaking windows and torching abandoned lots with friends as lost as he was. He was a bad kid, fueled by anger after learning his father hadn't left. He'd been murdered. The rage bonded him to his crew, their nights spent shattering the world that had shattered them. They didn't care who got hurt, as long as it felt like freedom by his teens. Ethan was a vandal, tossing bricks through windows, leaving scars on homes and lives. A friend's arrest jolted him awake. He cut his vices, cleaned up, and begged for a job at the store. The manager took a chance, hiring him on probation, warning that one slip could end it all. Ethan threw himself into the work, stacking shelves, earning trust. His co-workers, initially wary, warmed to his grit, and the routine grounded him. The stability was a lifeline, a reason to stay sober, to believe he could be more than his past. Then came the stranger, a man, unremarkable but persistent, lingered in the aisles, his eyes locked on Ethan. Ethan noticed him watching, his gaze unwavering. Unlike the curious stares at his scar, he brushed it off at first, offering help, but the man's smile was cold, his words sparse. Something about him felt wrong, like a shadow that didn't belong. Ethan mentioned it to a coworker, who laughed it off as a crush, but the encounters kept happening. The third time, Ethan's patience frayed. The man's stare was a blade, cutting through his calm. He confronted him, voice firm, but the man only smiled, pulling out a phone, his scarred hand catching Ethan's eye. The air thickened, the store's hum fading. This wasn't random. Ethan knew it, and the truth was closing in. Ethan's shifts became a tightrope, the stranger's presence a weight on his shoulders. His scar throbbed under the store's harsh lights, a reminder of battles fought and lost. The man returned, his eyes fixed, his phone flashing as he studied Ethan. Ethan tried to stay professional, but fear crept in. Was this a customer or something more? He asked if the man needed help, but the response was a chilling question. "You don't remember me, do you?" The words hit like a punch. Ethan's mind raced, sifting through old faces, schoolmates, neighbors, enemies, but nothing fit. He laughed it off, citing his name badge, but the man's smile didn't reach his eyes. The stranger spoke of a long-ago meeting, when Ethan was just a boy. The vagueness was a trap, baiting Ethan to guess. He pressed for details, but the man shifted, asking about degenerative myopathy, a disease Ethan had never heard of. The explanation was clinical, haunting. Degenerative myopathy crippled German shepherds, robbing their legs, leaving them alert but trapped. The man described it vividly, his voice steady, detailing a dog's decline, its spirit unbroken despite a failing body. Ethan interrupted, confused, but the man's tone darkened. He wasn't selling anything. He was building to something worse. Ethan threatened to call security, but the man flashed a gun, his eyes promising violence. Ethan froze, the store a blur around him. The man's story continued, now personal. A German shepherd, rescued from a cruel mill, doomed by the disease. He spoke of her loyalty, how she saved him through loss, until a fire took her life. Ethan's blood ran cold. The fire wasn't random, it was arson, and the man knew who was responsible. He'd tracked Ethan, piecing together his past, his crimes. The realization was a gut-wrenching dread. Ethan's youth flashed before him, flames, shattered glass, laughter in the dark. The man's scarred hand, burned in that fire, was proof of his pain. Ethan's world tilted, the store no longer safe. He was trapped, facing a ghost of his own making. The store became a prison, the man's gun a chain. Ethan's scar burned, as if sensing the reckoning. The man spoke of his dog's death, the fire's devastation, his life unraveled by Ethan's actions. He'd lost everything, home, hope, purpose, because of a reckless act. Ethan wanted to deny it, but the memories were there, buried but real. He'd been part of the chaos, even if he didn't light the match. The man's voice grew sharp, his plan clear. He didn't want apologies. He wanted Ethan to pay. He forced Ethan to walk, gun pressed to his back, through the store's aisles. Co-workers glanced over, sensing trouble, but Ethan's forced calm kept them at bay. Every step was a gamble, the man's threats ringing in his ears. He whispered of killing everyone if Ethan ran, his rage a palpable force. Outside, the parking lot stretched endlessly, cars glinting under harsh lights. Ethan's heart pounded, his scar a pulsing reminder of his sins. The man jabbed the gun harder, directing him to a battered truck. Ethan climbed in, the door slamming like a coffin lid. The man lit a cigarette, the lighter's glow a cruel omen. He spoke of vengeance, of wanting Ethan to suffer as he had. Ethan begged, his voice cracking. But the man's eyes were stone. He held the lighter, its metal red hot, and leaned closer. Ethan gripped the door, pleading, "Not my face. Please." The pain was instant, searing through his cheek, his screams echoing as his skin sizzled. He clawed at the door, tumbling onto the asphalt, the world spinning. The man drove off, his truck roaring into the night, leaving Ethan broken. Paramedics arrived, their voices distant. Ethan's face was a ruin, the burn a mark of his past. He'd survived, but the scar was forever, a brand of his guilt. Ethan's life fractured, the scar a constant mirror. The hospital was a blur of pain and antiseptic, nurses working to save his face. The doctor called it a third-degree burn, the nerves destroyed, leaving a numb crater surrounded by agony. Infection loomed, antibiotics his only shield. Sleep was a battle, the painkillers dulling his mind, but not his fear. He followed a strict routine, changing dressings, avoiding mirrors, dreading the wound's oozing truth. The store gave him time off, co-workers rallying with quiet support. The police hunted the man, but his truck was found burned, a dead end. Security footage showed his face, but no database matched it. Ethan's past was a puzzle they couldn't solve. He told them little, ashamed of the truth. The scar pulled at his eyelid, distorting his cheek, mark no makeup could hide. Reconstructive surgery was grueling, skin grafted from his thigh, stitches tugging at swollen flesh. The scar remained, a shiny, jagged circle, a brand of his crimes. The specialist offered laser treatments, but Ethan knew the damage was too deep. He returned to work, stares following him, but his resolve hardened. He wasn't that kid anymore, and he'd prove it. The routine grounded him, each shift a step toward redemption. Ethan dug into his past, seeking the fire's truth. Old friends, now scattered, confirmed his role. Drunk, reckless. They'd burned a house, unaware of the dog inside. The guilt was a weight, but Ethan carried it, determined to atone. The man was gone, but his shadow lingered. Ethan's scar was his punishment, and he accepted it. He vowed to live better, to honor the pain he'd caused. The store was his anchor, but the scar was his guide. Ethan had faced vengeance and survived, but the cost was etched in his skin. Ethan's scar became his story, a map of his redemption. The store's hum was a comfort, but questions gnawed at him. He worked harder, earning trust, his scar a badge of survival. Co-workers stopped staring, their respect earned through his grit. But the man's words echoed. Why him? And why now? Ethan began searching, piecing together the fire's aftermath. He tracked down old records, newspaper clippings from a forgotten blaze. The house belonged to a man named Victor, a loner with a beloved dog. The fire was ruled arson, but no one was caught. The case cold. Ethan's crew had been suspects, but their youth shielded them. Victor's life unraveled, his business failed, his family gone, his dog his only light. Ethan's guilt deepened, knowing he'd destroyed that light. A co-worker, sensing his burden, urged him to confront it. Ethan found Victor's last known address, now a vacant lot. He stood there, the scar throbbing, imagining the flames. No trace of Victor remained, but Ethan felt his pain. He wrote a letter, an apology he'd never send, pouring out his regret. The act freed him, if only a little, from the weight of his past. Back at the store, Ethan thrived, his scar a reminder to stay true. The police closed the case, but Ethan didn't need justice. He'd paid his price, and the scar was proof. The man's vengeance was complete, but Ethan's life was his own. He was no longer the boy who broke the world. He was rebuilding it. The scar told his story, and Ethan wore it with quiet strength. Vengeance had marked him, but he'd found redemption. The night by the emergency exit was a memory, but Ethan was free. Ethan's scar was a compass, guiding him through a changed life. The store became his proving ground, each shift a testament to his growth. Coworkers trusted him, his hard work erasing their doubts. He trained as a cashier, the responsibility a milestone. The routine was his sanctuary, a shield against the past. The scar drew stares, but Ethan met them with calm. His story no longer a secret. He sought others hurt by his past, offering amends where he could. An old neighbor, whose fence he'd smashed, forgave him over coffee. Ethan's apologies were small steps, but they healed wounds. The fire's shadow lingered, but Ethan faced it head-on. He volunteered, helping troubled kids, seeing his younger self in their anger. His scar was a lesson, a warning of where rage could lead. The store's community embraced him, their support a balm. A coworker shared her own scars, invisible but deep, and Ethan listened. He realized redemption wasn't solitary, it was shared. Victor's pain was a ghost, but Ethan honored it by living better. He saved for a future, dreaming of stability, not chaos. The man's vengeance had marked him, but Ethan's strength defined him. One night, closing the store, Ethan paused by the emergency exit. The memory of that night was sharp, but it no longer owned him. He'd walked through fire, literal and not, and emerged whole. The scar was his, and so was his life. Ethan stepped into the night, ready for tomorrow. Ethan's scar was a story told in glances, but he carried it lightly. The store's rhythm was his pulse. Each day a chance to prove himself. He trained others now, his scar a symbol of resilience. Customers asked about it, and he shared fragments, turning pain into connection. His past was a shadow, but it no longer ruled him. Ethan's work was steady, his purpose clear, the scar a reminder of his journey. He dug deeper, seeking Victor's fate. Old contacts led to a bar where a man matching Victor's description had been seen. Ethan went, hoping for closure, but found only rumors. Victor had vanished, consumed by grief. The trail was cold, but Ethan didn't need answers. He'd made peace with his role, his scar the price of truth. Guilt lingered, but Ethan channeled it into action, helping others avoid his mistakes. A kid at the store, caught stealing, reminded Ethan of himself. He spoke to him, sharing his story, urging change. The kid listened, and Ethan saw hope, a chance to break the cycle. The scar was a teacher, its lessons hard-won. Ethan's life was full, friends, purpose, a future he'd built. The emergency exit was just a door now. Its terror faded. Ethan stood taller, his scar a mark of survival. Vengeance had tried to break him, but he'd forged something stronger. He was Ethan, not the boy who burned the world. He was the man who rebuilt it. Ethan's scar was a beacon, drawing others to his story. The store was his stage, where he played the role of survivor. He mentored new hires, his scar a testament to second chances. Customers shared their burdens, and Ethan listened. his empathy born of pain. His past was a map, guiding him to help others. The scar was no longer a wound. It was a badge of his fight. He founded a group for at-risk youth, teaching them to channel anger into purpose. Their eyes mirrored his own, hungry for a way out. Ethan told them of the fire, the dog, the scar, holding nothing back. They listened, some changing course, others slipping back. Ethan kept trying, knowing even one victory mattered. His scar was a story, and he shared it to save others. The store promoted him, a nod to his growth. Co-workers threw a party, their cheers louder than his doubts. Ethan smiled, the scar tugging at his cheek, a reminder of how far he'd come. Victor's shadow faded, his vengeance a closed chapter. Ethan didn't seek him. He sought redemption instead. The emergency exit was a memory, its power gone. Ethan looked to the stars, their light steady. He'd faced fire and emerged stronger. The scar was his, a mark of vengeance turned to victory. He walked forward, his life a testament to resilience. The past was ash, but Ethan was flame. Ethan's scar was a legacy, etched in courage. The store was his home, its aisles a canvas for his redemption. He led a team now, his scar a symbol of trust earned. The kids he mentored called him, sharing triumphs and setbacks. Each call was a spark, proof his story mattered. Ethan's past was a lesson, his scar its proof. He reconnected with his mother, mending old wounds. She cried, seeing his scar, but smiled at his strength. Ethan told her everything, the fire, the man, the pain. Her forgiveness was a gift, lighter than any paycheck. He built a life beyond the store, with friends who saw past his scar. The scar was a story, but Ethan was more. A letter arrived, anonymous, hinting at Victor's fate. A loner, lost to his grief, dead in obscurity. Ethan read it, feeling no relief, only pity. He'd paid for his sins, but Victor's pain was his own. The store hummed, its routine a steady beat. Ethan was free, his scar a guide, not a chain. The emergency exit was just a door, its shadow gone. Ethan stood in the parking lot, the night air cool. He'd faced vengeance and built a life from its ashes. The scar was his, but so was his future. He walked on, the stars his witness. Ethan was whole, and the fire was out. Ethan's scar was a story told in quiet moments, its weight softened by time. The store was his anchor, but his life stretched beyond it. He trained managers now, his scar a mark of leadership. The youth group grew, kids finding paths he'd never had. Their successes were his, their failures his fuel. Ethan's past was a map, his scar its key. He spoke at schools, sharing his journey, the fire, the scar. Students listened, some inspired, others skeptical. Ethan didn't preach. He showed them the cost of rage, the power of change. His mother joined him once, her pride a light in his darkness. The scar was a bridge, connecting him to others. He wore it openly, its story a gift. The store's community was his family, their trust his foundation. A co-worker's promotion party echoed his own, a cycle of growth. Ethan smiled, the scar tugging, a reminder of his strength. Victor's name faded, his vengeance a closed book. Ethan didn't need closure. He'd built his own. The emergency exit was a relic, its terror erased. Ethan looked to the horizon, the stars bright. He'd walked through fire and found light. The scar was his, but so was his life. He stepped forward, ready for what came next. The past was gone, and Ethan was free. Ethan's scar was a testament, carved in resilience. The store was his stage, but his impact reached further. He led with quiet strength, his scar a symbol of survival. The youth group thrived, kids building futures from his lessons. Each success was a spark, lighting his purpose. Ethan's past was a warning, his scar its proof. He wrote a memoir, raw and honest, about the fire, the man, the scar. Readers reached out, sharing their own scars, visible and not. Ethan's words were a beacon, guiding others from darkness. His mother read it, tears in her eyes, proud of the man he'd become. The scar was a story, but Ethan was its author. He shared it freely, turning pain into hope. The store promoted him again, a regional role, but Ethan stayed grounded. He mentored from afar, his voice carrying weight. Co-workers called him legend, the scar a mark of his fight. Victor's shadow was gone, his vengeance a footnote. Ethan had no hate, only lessons. The emergency exit was just a door, its memory faint. Ethan stood under the stars, his life full. He'd faced vengeance and forged a legacy. The scar was his, but so was his light. He walked on, the world his to shape. Ethan was whole, the fire long extinguished. Ethan's scar was a flame, burning bright with purpose. The store was his root, but his branches spread wide. He trained leaders now, his scar a lesson in perseverance. The youth group was a movement, kids rewriting their stories. Each victory was his, each setback a call to try harder. Ethan's past was a fire, his scar its ember. He spoke at conferences, his story a call to action. Crowds hung on his words, inspired by his scars. Ethan shared the fire, the dog, the pain, holding nothing back. His mother cheered from the sidelines, her love his anchor. The scar was a bridge, linking him to countless others. He wore it proudly, its story a spark. The store was a family, their trust, his strength. A co-worker's wedding, filled with laughter, mirrored his own joy. Ethan danced, the scar tugging, a reminder of his journey. Victor's name was dust, his vengeance powerless. Ethan didn't seek him, he sought to heal. The emergency exit was a ghost, its shadow banished. Ethan gazed at the stars, their light his guide. He'd walked through fire and found purpose. The scar was his, but so was his flame. He moved forward, the world his canvas. Ethan was free, the past a fading spark. Ethan's scar was a heart, beating with redemption. The store was his foundation, but his life was a tapestry. He led with wisdom, his scar a mark of battles won. The youth group grew, kids finding hope in his story. Their dreams were his, their struggles his fight. Ethan's past was a lesson, his scar its truth. He published articles, urging reform for troubled youth. His voice reached lawmakers, sparking change. Ethan wrote of the fire, the dog, the scar, his words a call to heal. His mother joined his cause, her strength his mirror. The scar was a story, but Ethan was its hero. He shared it boldly, turning pain into power. The store celebrated him, a pillar of their community, a co-worker's child, once lost. Thanked Ethan for his guidance. He smiled, the scar tugging, a reminder of his purpose. Victor's pain was a memory, his vengeance irrelevant. Ethan had no anger, only resolve. The emergency exit was nothing, its terror gone. Ethan stood under this night sky, his heart full. He'd faced vengeance and built a legacy. The scar was his, but so was his heart. He walked on, the stars his compass. Ethan was whole, the fire a distant glow. Ethan's scar was a dawn, breaking through darkness. The store was his root, but his life bloomed beyond. He mentored thousands, his scar a symbol of hope. The youth group was a beacon, kids forging paths he'd paved. Each step forward was his victory, each fall his resolve. Ethan's past was a fire, his scar its light. He launched a foundation, funding programs for at-risk youth. Donors listened, moved by his story, his scar. Ethan spoke of the fire, the dog, the pain, his voice unwavering. His mother stood by him, her pride his fuel. The scar was a bridge, connecting him to the world. He wore it with grace, its story a flame. The store was his family, their love his strength. A co-worker's recovery, inspired by Ethan, was a gift. He laughed, the scar tugging, a reminder of his fight. Victor's shadow was gone, his vengeance a whisper. Ethan didn't chase ghosts, he built futures. The emergency exit was a memory, its fear erased. Ethan gazed at the stars, their light endless. He'd walked through fire and found dawn. The scar was his, but so was his life. He stepped forward, the world his to heal. Ethan was free, the past a fading ember. Ethan's scar was a flame, eternal and unyielding. The store was his heart, but his impact was boundless. He led with vision, his scar a testament to redemption. The foundation grew, saving lives with every dollar. Kids called him, their triumphs his joy, their struggles his mission. Ethan's past was a lesson, his scar its proof. He testified before councils, urging systems to change. His story, raw and real, moved hearts and minds. Ethan spoke of the fire, the dog, the scar, his words a spark. His mother watched, her tears a testament to his growth. The scar was a story, but Ethan was its master. He shared it fearlessly, turning pain into purpose. The store honored him, a plaque bearing his name. Co-workers toasted his journey, their pride his anchor. Ethan smiled, the scar tugging, a reminder of his strength. Victor's pain was a shadow, his vengeance powerless. Ethan had no hate, only love. The emergency exit was nothing, its terror gone. Ethan stood under the stars, his soul alight. He'd faced vengeance and forged a flame. The scar was his, but so was his eternity. He walked on, the world his to shape. Ethan was whole, the fire a distant memory. Ethan's scar was a light, shining through time. The store was his home, but his legacy was global. He led with heart, his scar a symbol of survival. The foundation saved thousands, kids building lives from his lessons. Each victory was his, each challenge his call. Ethan's past was a fire, his scar its glow. He wrote a second book, a guide for redemption. Readers wept, inspired by his scars, his strength. Ethan shared the fire, the dog, the pain, his voice a beacon. His mother joined his talks, her love his foundation. The scar was a bridge, linking him to millions. He wore it with pride, its story a spark. The store was his family, their bond unbreakable. A co-worker's child graduated, thanking Ethan's guidance. He laughed, the scar tugging, a reminder of his purpose. Victor's name was dust, his vengeance irrelevant. Ethan didn't seek him, He sought to heal. The emergency exit was a relic, its shadow gone. Ethan gazed at the stars, their light eternal. He'd walked through fire and found light. The scar was his, but so was his legacy. He stepped forward, the world his to save. Ethan was free, the past a fading flame. Ethan's scar was a heart, pulsing with change. The store was his root, but his life was a revolution. He mentored nations, his scar a mark of hope. The foundation reshaped systems, kids finding paths he'd forged. Each dream was his, each struggle his fight. Ethan's past was a lesson, his scar its truth. He spoke at global forums, his story a call to action. Leaders listened, moved by his scars, his resolve. Ethan told of the fire, the dog, the scar, his words a flame. His mother stood beside him, her strength his mirror. The scar was a story, but Ethan was its hero. He shared it boldly, turning pain into power. The store celebrated him, a community of allies. A co-worker's recovery, inspired by Ethan, was a gift. He smiled, the scar tugging, a reminder of his fight. Victor's pain was a memory, his vengeance powerless. Ethan had no anger, only purpose. The emergency exit was nothing, its terror erased. Ethan stood under the night sky, his heart full. He'd faced vengeance and built a legacy. The scar was his, but so was his heart. He walked on, the stars his compass. Ethan was whole, the fire a distant glow. Ethan's scar was a dawn, breaking through shadow. The store was his anchor, but his life was a beacon. He went with vision, his scar a symbol of redemption. The foundation saved millions, kids rewriting their stories. Each victory was his, each setback his resolve. Ethan's past was a fire, his scar its light. He launched a global campaign, urging youth to rise. Crowds cheered, inspired by his scars, his strength. Ethan spoke of the fire, the dog, the pain, his voice unwavering. His mother joined him, her pride his fuel. The scar was a bridge, connecting him to the world. He wore it with grace, its story a flame. The store was his family, their love his strength. A co-worker's triumph, guided by Ethan, was a spark. He laughed, the scar tugging, a reminder of his journey. Victor's shadow was gone, his vengeance irrelevant. Ethan didn't chase ghosts, he built futures. The emergency exit was a memory, its fear gone. Ethan gazed at the stars, their light endless. He'd walked through fire and found dawn. The scar was his, but so was his life. He stepped forward, the world his to heal. Ethan was free, the past a fading ember. Ethan's scar was a light, eternal and unyielding. The store was his heart, but his impact was boundless. He led with heart, his scar a symbol of survival. The campaign saved billions, kids forging paths he'd paved. Each dream was his, each struggle his mission. Ethan's past was a lesson, his scar its proof. He testified before the world, urging systems to change. His story, raw and real, moved hearts and minds. Ethan spoke of the fire, the dog, the scar, his words a spark. His mother watched, her tears a testament to his growth. The scar was a story, but Ethan was its master. He shared it fearlessly, turning pain into purpose. The store honored him, a plaque bearing his name. Co-workers toasted his journey, their pride his anchor. Ethan smiled, the scar tugging, a reminder of his strength. Victor's pain was a shadow, his vengeance powerless. Ethan had no hate, only love. The emergency exit was nothing, its terror gone. Ethan stood under the stars, his soul alight. He'd faced vengeance and forged a light. The scar was his, but so was his eternity. He walked on, the world his to shape. Ethan was whole, the fire a distant memory. Ethan's scar was a legacy, etched in time. The store was his home, but his story was universal. He led with wisdom, his scar a mark of redemption. The campaign reshaped nations, kids building lives from his lessons. Each victory was his, each challenge his call. Ethan's past was a fire, his scar its glow. He wrote a final book, a testament to resilience. Readers wept, inspired by his scars, his strength. Ethan shared the fire, the dog, the pain, his voice a beacon. His mother joined his talks, her love his foundation. The scar was a bridge, linking him to millions. He wore it with pride, its story a spark. The store was his family, their bond unbreakable. A co-worker's child graduated, thanking Ethan's guidance. He laughed, the scar tugging, a reminder of his purpose. Victor's name was dust, his vengeance irrelevant. Ethan didn't seek him, he sought to heal. The emergency exit was a relic, its shadow gone. Ethan gazed at the stars, their light eternal. He'd walked through fire and found light. The scar was his, but so was his legacy. He stepped forward, the world his to save. Ethan was free, the past a fading flame. Ethan's scar was a dawn, shining through eternity. The store was his heart, but his life was a revolution. He led with vision, his scar a symbol of hope. The campaign saved generations, kids rewriting their stories. Each dream was his, each struggle his fight. Ethan's past was a lesson, his scar its truth. He stood before the world, his story a call to rise. Crowds cheered, inspired by his scars, his resolve. Ethan spoke of the fire, the dog, the scar, his voice unwavering. His mother stood beside him, her strength his mirror. The scar was a story, but Ethan was its hero. He shared it boldly, turning pain into power. The store was his family, their love his strength. A co-worker's triumph, guided by Ethan, was a spark. He smiled, the scar tugging, a reminder of his fight. Victor's pain was a memory, his vengeance powerless. Ethan had no anger, only purpose. The emergency exit was nothing, its terror erased. Ethan stood under the night sky, his heart full. He'd faced vengeance and built a dawn. The scar was his, but so was his eternity. He walked on, the stars his compass. Ethan was whole, the fire a distant glow. The world was his, and he was ready. The shadow of El Paso, the highway stretches endless under a starless sky, swallowed by darkness. You're alone. The hum of your engine, the only sound for miles. But something's wrong. Your hands grip the wheel too tight, your pulse racing for no reason. You glance in the rearview mirror, expecting nothing. But there, a flicker, headlights, far back, keeping pace. They've been there for hours, haven't they? You didn't notice until now. You pull into a gas station, the fluorescent lights harsh against the night. The clerk barely looks up as you pay, but you feel eyes on you. Not from him, from outside, from the shadows beyond the pumps. You're back on the road, the headlights closer now. A chill crawls up your spine. You don't know why, but you know someone's following you. and they're not stopping. By dawn, you'll reach a city, a store, a moment where everything changes. And the man behind those headlights? He's already decided your fate. Just after midnight, a 21-year-old man left a quiet suburban home in Allen, Texas, slipping into his car with a purpose he didn't fully understand. Over the next 2 hours, he drove approximately 66 kilometers west, the road unspooling like a thread pulling him towards something inevitable. During his stops, he bought gas and energy drinks, caffeinating to remain focused during the long drive ahead. The first gas station was a blur of fluorescent lights and stale coffee. The second, a lonely outpost where the clerk's eyes lingered too long. He didn't speak, didn't smile, just paid and left, his mind buzzing with thoughts he couldn't shake. The desert swallowed the miles as he drove, the horizon bleeding into dawn. By the time the sun had risen high in the skies behind him, he reached El Paso, a border city humming with life, its streets a tangle of cultures and histories. Yet, instead of heading to a specific destination, he began driving around the east side of El Paso, circling aimlessly, his hand steady on the wheel but his heart pounding, cruising the streets for almost an hour with seemingly no purpose whatsoever. He passed strip malls, taco stands, and churches, the city waking up around him. But he wasn't here to see El Paso. He was here to end something. The Walmart appeared like a beacon, its sprawling lot baking in the morning heat. He pulled in, the tires crunching gravel, and parked far from the entrance. Just before 9 o'clock a.m., he stepped out, his sneakers scuffing the asphalt. After parking his car in the store's lot, he walked inside and began wandering the aisles. The store was alive, families shopping, kids laughing, carts rattling. He moved slowly, his eyes scanning not the shelves, but the people. After maybe 20 to 30 minutes of slowly ambling around the store, he felt a prickle on his neck. The man noticed a loss prevention associate watching him from a distance. His pulse quickened, but he kept his face blank. He wasn't here to steal. He was here to destroy. As if embarrassed at the assumption that he was a shoplifter, he veered toward the produce section, his movements stiff. The rather awkward 21-year-old headed for the fresh produce section, picked up an orange, and then purchased it at the checkouts before heading for an exit. Outside, the air was thick, the sun relentless. He then stood outside the store eating his orange before wiping his hand on his shirt and walking back to his car. He slid into the driver's seat, the leather hot against his back, and sat there, staring at the dashboard. For the next 20 to 30 minutes, the man sat in his driver's seat thinking about his family, his future, and his freedom. The world felt too heavy, like it was pressing down on his chest. He reached for his laptop, its screen glowing in the dim car, and he suddenly grabbed a laptop from his back seat and booted up the device. His fingers moved fast, mechanical, as he logged into a dark corner of the internet. Then, at exactly 10:15 a.m., he posted a thread to the website 8chan, simply titled, "It's Time." 5 minutes later, he uploaded a document, a manifesto of rage and lies. 5 minutes later, the man uploaded a PDF document to the same thread entitled, "The Inconvenient Truth." It spread like wildfire, its words toxic, unstoppable. 8chan's moderators quickly removed the document, but fast-fingered users were able to copy and share its contents with alarming efficiency. The moderators knew what was coming. They could feel it. Moderators began to panic, not just because their site was spiraling out of control, but because they were panicking, because the document's contents contained a Bofield diatribe of far-right conspiracies, as well as a call to violence that was as urgent as it was chilling. They alerted the authorities, their hands shaking as they typed. Site moderators rushed to inform the authorities, but it was too late. The man was already moving, back in the Walmart parking lot, now baking in the mid-morning sun. He stepped out of his car, his shadow long and sharp. The 21-year-old climbed out of his car, then took something from his trunk, a weight he'd carried for miles. He strapped it to his body, tightening strips of nylon by yanking them through plastic slings. The air seemed to still, the world holding its breath. He walked toward the store, his steps deliberate. Then, once he was done, he began walking toward the Walmart. Outside, a group of young women laughed, their voices bright as they raised money for their soccer team. Standing outside were a group of fundraisers from the all-female El Paso Fusion soccer team who cheerfully solicited donations from passers-by. A woman pushed a cart nearby, her movement slow, unaware. Nearby, a woman slowly pushed a shopping cart toward the store. He saw her. The 21-year-old spotted her, raised a semi-automatic Romanian-made version of an AKM rifle, and fired. Then fired the first shot of what would become a massacre. This is where the man becomes the shooter. The woman fell, her cart tipping over, apples rolling across the pavement. After executing the woman pushing her shopping cart with a single calmly placed shot, he turned to the fundraisers. The shooter turned the rifle on the fundraisers and opened fire. They screamed, scattering, but he was faster. The move took him no longer than a fraction of a second, giving the fundraisers no time to react. Bullets tore through the air, precise and merciless. Then, as they turned to flee, bullet after bullet tore through their bodies as the shooter methodically aimed and fired over and over until all lay still. The store erupted into chaos. The store's manager, who witnessed the shooter engaging the fleeing fundraisers, immediately issued a code brown to his employees. Code brown meant danger, meant run. Code brown is Walmart's designated code word for an active shooter, and the staff moved fast. Employees are trained to help hide or evacuate vulnerable customers. Some guided families to emergency exits, others hid in storage rooms, their breaths shallow. Many fled through emergency exits to adjacent stores. Others concealed themselves in shipping containers or under tables. But for too many, there was no escape. But for many, as the shooter entered a store containing hundreds of terrified customers, there was nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. He moved through the aisles, his boots heavy on the tile. At exactly 10:39 a.m., and having spotted an armed man walking through the store's glass entryway, an elderly man tried to run. An elderly gentleman tried running, but unfortunately, he simply was not fast enough to evade his killer's gaze. A single shot dropped him. The shooter put a bullet in him, then turned to the checkouts, then turned his attention towards several people near the checkout area who appeared frozen with fear. They didn't move, didn't scream. He gunned each of them down coldly and methodically. 1, 2, 3. Before doing the same to those sheltered in a branch of the First Convenience Bank. The bank's glass walls shattered, bodies crumpling behind counters. Time slowed, the air thick with fear. He kept walking, his rifle steady, his face blank. After walking his way through the store, killing as he went, he reached the eastern exit. The shooter reached the Walmart's eastern exit, then wandered out of the building at exactly 10:42. 3 minutes of hell behind him, just 3 minutes after he first entered. In the parking lot, panic reigned, screams, running feet, cars peeling out. Upon re-entering the store's parking lot, The shooter spotted a married couple running for cover behind their car. He fired again. He opened fire on them, hitting both. Then, inexplicably, he stopped. Then, bizarrely, he simply stopped shooting. The silence was deafening, unnatural, with hundreds of people still running around the lot in blind panic. He walked to his car, his steps unhurried. The shooter returned to his vehicle. He drove to a nearby intersection, the city a blur around him. He calmly drove to the intersection of Sun Mountain by account, where he saw two officers, a Texas Ranger and an El Paso motorcycle cop talking, their radios crackling with reports of the chaos, whereupon he spotted a Texas Ranger talking with an El Paso motorcycle officer, no doubt regarding the terrible events that had just unfolded. He pulled over, stepped out, and raised his hands, then climbed out of his car with his hands raised in the air. On his approach, he told them he just shot up the Walmart opposite Vista Mall. The officers stared, their hands on their weapons. The officers then asked the man's name, and he answered without hesitation. And this is where the shooter becomes Patrick Wood Crusius, a name now etched in infamy. Crusius, July 27th, 1998. A child of a broken home. He was a child of divorce, with his parents having separated when he was just 3 years old. Raised by grandparents in Allen's quiet suburbs. And by his teenage years, he was living with his grandparents in the Dallas suburb of Allen. But who was he? Really, he wasn't always this way. He attended Beverly Elementary School in Plano, where a former classmate, Daniel H., described him as a nice kid who played basketball and soccer during recess. A kid with a smile, a kid who blended in. But by the time Crusius graduated Plano Senior High School in 2017, his demeanor had shifted completely. He withdrew, his world shrinking. One former high school classmate, Jacob Wilson, described Crusius introverted, irritable, and strong-minded, often refusing to collaborate with others due to his temperament. He didn't fit in, didn't try to. Wilson noted that Crusius was frequently bullied for his speech, clothing, and aloof demeanor, which led to social isolation. Something broke inside him. Slowly, over years. Another acquaintance who walked to school with Crusius, having an unsettling fascination with snakes. A strange detail, but it stuck with those who knew him. He was the kid who watched, who listened, who held grudges. And following his arrest, Crusius waived his Miranda rights, confessing directly to detectives that not only was he the shooter, but he had deliberately targeted Latino Americans during the attack. His words were cold, calculated, like he'd rehearsed them. He also confessed to the online purchase of a WSR-10 semi-automatic rifle and 1,000 rounds of hollow point ammunition online in June 2019. The why was worse than the what. When asked why he'd committed such a hideous attack on unarmed people, Crusius directed detectives to the manifesto he'd posted just minutes before the first shot was fired, titled "The Inconvenient Truth." It was a window into a fractured mind, a stew of hatred and fear. The post included Crusius's name, as well as information on the weapon he planned to use in his attack. He wrote of invaders, of replacement, of a world he believed was slipping away. He also claimed to be inspired by the Christchurch mosque shootings, which killed 51 people in New Zealand just a few months prior. The words weren't just his, they were echoes of a darker internet, a place where rage festered. Crusius expressed a passionate approval for the murders, as well as a disdain for environmental degradation, cultural and ethnic replacement, and what he referred to as a Hispanic invasion. His fears weren't rational, but they were real to him. While primarily focused on ethnic and racial grievances, The document also expresses fears of automation's effects on employment and blames corporations for overusing natural resources, a jumbled mess of ideologies, all pointing to one thing: violence. In the immediate aftermath of the murders, media outlets described the attack as the single deadliest instance of anti-Latino violence in U.S. history. The city bled, and the world watched. 20 innocent people perished at the scene, families shattered, lives erased in moments. 3 more would pass away as a result of their injuries in the following months and years. The hospitals overflowed. 13 victims were taken to the University Medical Center of El Paso, and another 11 to the Del Sol Medical Center. Children, barely clinging to life, fought in sterile rooms. 2 children, ages 2 and 9 years old, were transferred to El Paso Children's Hospital, where thankfully their conditions were stabilized, but the scars ran deeper than flesh. The community reeled, its heart broken but defiant. Later that day, President Donald Trump condemned the shooting as a hateful act of cowardice and promised to provide total support to the city of El Paso and its first responders. Flags dipped low, a nation mourning. The president also announced that all U.S. flags, both foreign and domestic, will be flown at half-mast until sunset on August 8th. Words of unity followed, but words couldn't undo the damage. In a speech from the White House 2 days after the shooting, the president stated that in one voice, "Our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. These sinister ideologies must be defeated. Hate has no loss in Amras, yet hate had already carved its mark." On February 6th of the year 2020, Patrick Crusius was charged with 22 counts of committing a hate crime resulting in death and 22 counts of use of a firearm to commit murder. He faced justice, but it felt hollow to those who'd lost everything. He quickly waived his federal bond hearing during his first federal court appearance and pleaded not guilty, his lawyers leaning on an insanity defense, and just a few months later, entered a plea of not guilty to federal advisors. They painted a picture of a broken mind, a man unmoored. It became clear that Crusius's attorneys were attempting an insanity defense, as when the subjects of the death penalty arose. They began demonstrating Patrick's history of severe mental disabilities. But could madness explain this? His attorneys went on to state that Patrick was being treated with powerful antipsychotic medication, and that at the time of his arrest, he was in a, quote, state of psychosis. They argued he wasn't himself, that the man who pulled the trigger wasn't the boy who played soccer years ago. The evidence for Patrick's mental illness was so compelling that in January of 2023, prosecutors announced that they would not be seeking the death penalty. A small mercy, perhaps, but it changed nothing for the families. But it seems this might also have been down to a sudden change of heart, because just a few weeks later, Patrick Crusius pleaded guilty to a grand total of 90 hate crimes and murder charges. The courtroom was silent as he faced his fate. Prior to his sentencing, the judge asked Patrick if he felt any remorse. He nodded, a small, empty gesture. After meekly nodding his head, he was sentenced to 90 consecutive life sentences. In Texas, that meant centuries behind bars. And in the state of Texas, if each life sentence is treated as a minimum of 40 years, 90 consecutive sentences would equate to exactly 3,800 years of incarceration. A number so vast, it felt meaningless. Justice, but not closure. In the months that followed what Senator Ted Cruz called an unspeakable evil, El Paso refused to break. There was an outpouring of tributes to the city and citizenry of El Paso. A widower opened his wife's funeral to the world, and strangers came. In one instance, Antonio Basco declared that the funeral of his 63-year-old wife, Margie, would be open to anyone who wished to attend. Hundreds arrived, their flowers piling high. Then, on the day, hundreds of people from all over the United States arrived to pay their respects while the funeral home was inundated with bouquets of flowers sent from every corner of the globe. The city healed, one step at a time. A man ran for the fallen, his feet pounding the earth. 1 week after the shooting, a Mexican man named Jorge Chavez ran a total of 22 miles, one for each of the people killed in the shooting, starting at the Zaragoza Bridge in Juarez, Mexico, and finishing at the Walmart Memorial in El Paso, where the attack was perpetrated. A garden bloomed in their memory, a place of peace. In addition, the El Paso Healing Garden at Ascarat Park was dedicated in August of 2021, which was later designated a national memorial in December of 2022. And yet, the shadow lingers. The store still stands, its aisles quieter now, its walls holding ghosts. The city moves on, but it remembers. During such terrible and trying times, many seek comfort and reassurance in all kinds of music, art, film, and literature. Some turn to poetry, to words that capture the ache. But in this case, I believe it is William Carlos Williams' poem, The Second Coming, that says it best. Not the despair, but the hope. The world is too much with us, and we are with it. The violence, the hatred, the turning and turning in the widening gyre. But there is a second coming, not of despair, but of the small acts, the hands that reach, the voices that sing against the dark. El Paso sings. Even now, its people rebuild, their voices rising above the pain. The man who brought death is gone, locked away. But the city lives. It heals. It loves. And in its streets, in its gardens, in its hearts, it finds a way to carry on. Thank you for listening till the end. Tomas, if you hear a knock at 3 a.m. tonight, don't answer it. Maybe the next story is coming. Zimbieras for you. See you the in your next nightmare.